Hi students, welcome to week 5. I wanted to put together a quick video for you about some of the assignments due this week and talk a little bit about a couple of the theoretical frameworks that you will be touching on this week. So first off, you'll notice under week 5 you have a case summary due. This case summary should cover some of the topics that you've gone over with your volunteer family, and there is a sample case summary provided under week 5 that I strongly recommend utilizing as your format when you create your case summary for your family's issue. As I mentioned in this week's posting under the announcements, your issue that you can address in your case summary should dovetail nicely into your week 7 theoretical interview as well as your family assessment paper. So it can be something minor, like an issue that comes up that, doesn't seem like a huge one, but something that your family is willing to discuss with you. Or it can be something major, and sometimes the issue can be a little bit hard to identify. Some families will come to you and say, hey, we want to talk about this thing, and other families may come to you and tell you they don't really have any issues, but once you get talking, you may discover that they do have something that they can discuss with you for your assignment, whether it's, disagreement in parenting styles or some sort of issue with behavior of one of their children, issues with in-laws, issues with household responsibilities. Those sorts of things are all valid for your case summary as well as your interview and your paper. So as you get into it, don't stress too much about what the issue is specifically, but more about whether it's something that you think you can address with the family, and then what kind of the contributing factors are and who the players are in whatever that issue is, so that you can prepare yourselves going into your week 7 assignments. So with that said, don't forget again to go under week 5 and look at the case summary sample that's provided. That is a great format for you to utilize. You can just take the week 5 summary example that's given and copy the exact formatting with your family's information. The other assignment that you have due this week is a discussion post, and I know this can be a little confusing, so I tried to explain it in the announcement I posted. Your discussion posts, you are split up into 3 different groups, but this is not a group assignment. It's an individual assignment that you should do by yourself and submit by yourself. So you are assigned to either group A, group B, or group C, and your original posting will fall under that group. So when you look in in week 5, you should only be able to see one of those initially, either A, B, or C. What'll happen is you will watch the video and respond to the prompts, and then once you've done that and posted, you will then see that you have access to the other 2 groups. And so then you're asked to go into those other 2 groups and respond to one peer in each of those. So for example, if you're assigned to group A, when you go under week 5, you will see group A's video and questions, and that was all you'll be able to access. You'll watch the video, you'll answer the prompts, you'll post. And then once that's complete, you will have access to group B and group C. And so you can go under group B and pick one of your peers and respond to their posting, and then do the same under group C. The only thing that I would ask with this is that you make sure that if somebody already has several responses to their post, that you pick a different one to respond to try and make sure that everyone has some peer responses coming through. And you will be assigned to the same groups for week 6, so it will be the same format for that, where if you're in group A, that's the only one you'll see initially, and then from there, once you post a response, you will be able to reply to a peer in group B and a peer in group C. If you have any questions, let me know, but make sure you read my announcement as well, because it also explains how that works. So I also wanted to touch base, you're popping into some of the theoretical frameworks this week, which is really kind of exciting and will feed directly into your theoretical interview, as well as your family assessment paper that you will do in week 7. So these 6 frameworks that you're introduced to, or maybe reintroduced to for some of you in weeks 5 and 6, can be really useful as you move forward. And they're also frameworks that are commonly used by social workers in family practice. So I wanted to just go a little bit over some of them to make sure that you have a kind of an understanding of the highlights of each of them. And I'm just going to give a little bit of quick information about how I see them being applied. So this week, one of your frameworks that you're going over is human validation model. And human validation model basically works on the premise that the human experience is universal, but that everyone has their individual strengths, and that individual strengths and life experiences will impact how somebody goes through life and how they respond to challenges. as well as positive things that happen for them. So, how we utilize strengths to help our clients is really key to this. And I would say in a lot of social work practice, the strengths-based perspective is really key and is really kind of valued as a positive way to approach change for individuals and families. So this really plays well into that in terms of social work ideologies. And families are seen in this framework as a whole unit, but they have different people with differing personalities. And so those differing personalities impact how the individual functions and then how the family unit functions, both in terms of how the family unit functions one person to another in the family unit as well as the unit as a whole. So if you're talking about a family of 5 or 6 people, each of those individual people has their own perspectives and strengths, and then their interactions will differ with each individual family member as well as how their relationship is with the family unit as a whole. The belief is that we're looking for patterns of behavior and motivations for change and how change might look. So there's a core belief that we manifest things we've learned over time. Things have been modeled to us, they've been taught to us directly, we've been told them, and we manifest them and address how we can change them based on survival stances. So really we're looking at how we approach challenges via methods such as placating, blaming, being super reasonable, or being irrelevant. So one of the other key points to this framework is that it views the problem as not being the problem. How we cope with it is the problem. So, for example, if we're talking about behavior issues with a teen in the household, the problem isn't necessarily that the teen has behavior issues. The problem is how we cope with and react to it, as well as how the teen is coping with and reacting to it. We all have the capacity to change, and the belief in this theory is that people are inherently good. And so what we can help them do is identify patterns and behaviors and motivations that are impacting their day-to-day life and help them focus on the positive, while we also employ some family sculpting as a path to positive change. So I would think human validation is a method that's used pretty commonly among social workers. Again, the strengths-based perspective is pretty commonly revered as a positive way to approach change within a family, and also the identification of individuals and their strengths and how their strengths contribute to what's going on in their world, as well as to the family dynamic, and how you can utilize those strengths and sort of separate the problem from the individual, and instead of focusing so heavily on the problem, focus on how we interact with the problem and how we view it, and how that our attitudes and our behaviors can be altered to help us view the problem differently and maybe identify some positive ways to approach it. So that is the human validation model. The next one that you'll look at is the structural model. In the structural model, the social worker sort of integrates into the family dynamic. You can utilize role playing to assist with that, which we sort of do in this class. And you can also utilize the method of acting out experiences with the family. Rather than being sort of an outside perspective, like a coach or a teacher, the social worker is really sort of part of the structure and the dynamic of the family using this methodology. So the goal is sort of to upset the hierarchy and the status quo, to help identify where dysfunction is happening and facilitate healthy change within the family. One of the things you really have to be aware of with structural framework is identifying boundaries and professional use of self in practice. If you're integrating yourself within a family unit and trying to disrupt the hierarchy, you have a high probability of having issues with boundary, as well as issues with things like triangulation between parents and children, or between certain members of the family and yourself as the practitioner. Issues with the power dynamic, issues with interactions between the family members and utilizing your role correctly versus getting involved in a way that maybe isn't in line with the code of ethics. You're really looking at sort of upsetting the status quo with the family. So oftentimes you'll see practitioners utilize methods like changing the seating dynamic in the room. And I believe you'll actually see this in the sample video where the practitioner has the family member who tends to be more dominant move to a physically further away position, or a position where they're not in the center of the room, which sort of physically reminds them that they are maybe not the center of the family or the universe. And so it's kind of an interesting methodology. In my professional world, I have not used structural framework, and really the reason why is because I think there's a high opportunity for crossing over of boundaries and for countertransference of some of the issues that exist. And so it's just not a method that feels comfortable for me. That doesn't make it wrong. Many people find it valid, but I find it a challenging methodology to use. And then the third method that we'll talk about, the third technique, is multi-generational. And I think you'll find, in particular, working with Hispanic and Latino families, that multi-generational can feel really relevant for these families. And there's good reason for that. Many Hispanic and Latino families are multi-generational households. The grandparents are really involved in the raising of the grandchildren and the instilling of values and culture and norms. And oftentimes, they may live together in a household. Oftentimes there's multi-generational issues related to acculturation and language and tradition, and perhaps grandma and grandpa came over as older adults to the US and moved in with their adult children and their children's children, so they're living with their kids and grandchildren. And the difference in how everything from schooling to social life to dating to education might be approached culturally by individuals who grew up in the US versus other countries can be a really interesting dynamic to view. So the multi-generational framework really looks at the culture within the family and the impact on individuals within the family and how they view the world and approach challenges. Again, cultural roles and norms are identified in this, and we look at the family as a whole unit. So multi-generational households, because they're so common within Hispanic and Latino families, this approach can sort of feel natural with them again. It's important to understand the challenges, though, when you're utilizing multi-generational approach. When you look at the differences in how different family members, depending on their acculturation level in the US, maybe approach things like family therapy. And some of you addressed that in your introduction videos when you talked about how your own family would address going to therapy, and maybe the views of, do we involve an outside professional when we're having issues, or do we keep these things to ourselves? And who is that professional? Is it a social worker? Is it school personnel? Is it somebody in your faith community? Is it another family member? All of those are kind of important things to think about when utilizing multi-generational approach. You want to look at things like norms within the family, patterns within the family, anything that helps you identify their internal family culture. The belief in multi-generational is that we learn who we are by and what our role is in life by looking at how our family functions. So if we grow up in a household where mom stays home and dad makes money and mom makes the decisions in the household, but dad is the public head of household, then that's what we grow up with, and that impacts how we view the world. So culture and tradition can be huge parts of looking at multi-generational theory, and we need to be respectful and cognizant of our family's culture and tradition when we're working with them. Again, with multi-generational, you want to be aware of triangulation, things like those famous sayings. Actually, my mother-in-law had a sign on her wall that said, "If mother says no, ask grandma." Issues like that can come up when you're working with multi-generational households. So this framework can be helpful in terms of identifying what the norm is within that family and how their family members are raised to believe in maybe roles and social norms. With multi-generational, it's important also to note that unlike structural family therapy, the therapist is a neutral observer, not an insider. So the job for the therapist is to help the clients understand their dynamic, but they don't necessarily lead by giving assignments or answers to the household or the family. So it's really sort of being a neutral outside observer who helps the family sort of identify, what cultural norms you recognize as their social worker, and maybe help them figure out how to challenge those on their own without necessarily being the outside professional who comes in and tells you how to challenge them. I will tell you that intentionally or not, multi-generational is the most common framework that's used in my day-to-day social work profession. I've worked with families, for example, one family who I work still pretty closely with, we came into contact with because the oldest son, who is now 21, I believe, was a high school student, and the family became homeless. And so we came in contact with them through the McKinney-Vento homeless liaison in our district. And he was set to be the first family member to graduate from high school. And dad had just been deported, and mom was struggling to make ends meet, and they lost their house and moved in with another family in their neighborhood. And the son was going to graduate and couldn't afford a cap and gown, couldn't afford senior pictures, couldn't do any of those things. And so we really wanted to step in and help, but we had to identify pretty early on that mom was only willing to accept a certain amount of help from us as outsiders, even though culturally the majority of the staff who were working with her, spoke Spanish and were Hispanic or Latino themselves. It was a really difficult challenge for her to accept outside help and to trust me as an outsider to assist her, especially given that her husband had just been deported. And so we helped her oldest son with graduation. And after he graduated, he wanted to go to college and go actually to trade school and become a welder. And mom struggled with that a lot because in mom's upbringing, he's the oldest son. So with the dad gone, he was now the head of household, and mom wanted him to go work. And, so the struggle for balance there, with him wanting to do better for himself and ultimately his family by getting education and a trade and being able to ultimately have a higher earning potential, while mom was worried about how she was going to pay the electric bill and wanting her son to go out and make money and be the head of household, was really, really challenging. So in situations like that, it's really important for us to remember that we have to respect the cultural norms, and not just the larger culture, but the family culture. And if the family culture says, oldest child, oldest son, dad is gone, and it's your job to support the household, how do we help them work through that without trying to be the expert or basically telling them how to live their life? And how do we deal with acculturation and the fact that maybe what we would suggest to mom, let him go to school and maybe he can work part-time, might not have been what felt culturally relevant and okay for them. So I think that that's probably the most common of these three that I use. So I will be curious to see what your responses are to this week's discussion posts, and I'm looking forward to reading them. Just wanted to provide a quick update. I am still in the process of updating your week 3 and week 4 grades, so I should have those done for you hopefully shortly. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, have a wonderful week. Thank you.